get a diagnosis, and not be scared that you're going to have to mortgage your life or choose between rent and medicine. So you're not radical if you believe that that's something that we should have as a modern society. It's not even like we're trying to go to space in the 1960s, right? I wish that we could have this, like, you know, this mentality that, and this pride that people have. I wish that you know, that the United States is cutting edge and number one in everything, that we do everything in a way that no other country has done before. I'm just trying to catch up to some civilized other societies that actually care for each other. You know, we're not even trying to be the first to guarantee healthcare in their country. We're not even trying to say the United States is super ambitious and we should establish the first, you know, guaranteed healthcare policy in the world. No, we're already behind. We're already behind. And we need to catch up to the rest of the world. And if we want to take pride in leading the pack, then that means we need to lead the pack. And leading the pack means Medicare for all. It means vision, dental, physical, and mental health care that you can go in and not have a problem. Walk in, say, this is the help that I need. You get a diagnosis, you're able to get that assistance. And when people say, oh my gosh, like, you have to think about how people wait in other countries. First of all, many of those claims very over-exaggerated. But second of all, how long do you wait to go to the doctor because you don't think you can afford it? How many of you all have waited 5 years to go to the dentist because you're scared that it's going to cost $2,000 and you don't have $2,000? So our system is already a system where people self-select themselves into multi-year wait lists because they know they can't afford it. They know they can't afford getting that root canal or getting your tooth pulled that's hurting you, that it ends up costing more and more money the longer we wait because we can't afford it in the short. We can't afford the $500 in the short term, so we're gonna have to pay the $2,000 in the long term, right? That's a system that doesn't make sense. And by the way, a guaranteed healthcare system is cheaper than what we're doing right now. Cheaper than what we're doing right now. So anyways, shout out to my fellow radicals in the United States who believe crazy things like a full-time job should be enough for you to live. And also, you know, believe in crazy radical things like if you kill someone, there shouldn't be impunity. And also who believe really crazy radical things like you should get a stimulus check without having to bail out a corporation for it, or that you should get a stimulus check without your employer, you know, if you work for one of these huge conglomerate employers, sending you into harm's way and being completely immune from any accountability for that. You know, shout out to my fellow radicals who think that, you know, we should live in a humane, advanced society, and that we shouldn't be under the thumb of a $7 minimum wage and, you know, racist systems because, I don't know, because that just benefits whoever the people are in power to already be in power. So, you know, shout out to my radicals who think that maybe one way that we can deal with a lot of the shortfall that we have is to do things like legalize marijuana and tax the commerce on that so that we can fund our schools. Or, I don't know, tax the rich. Maybe we can tax the rich so that people who have helipads on their house or near their house can help chip in for black school districts that are perpetually underfunded. How about we do that? But apparently, if you believe in that, you are radical, far left, danger to this country. Both parties will disassociate with you, right? But if you are a Republican member of Congress who signs on to an amicus brief to overturn the results of our national election, which 106 House Republicans did, not just challenge a precinct, not just challenge a state, but challenge many states. Just challenge the results of an election, actually undermine our Democrat, I don't even want to say Democrat, big D Democrat, our democracy. If you want to undermine our democracy so that you can advance minority rule in the United States because black and brown people not voting for you is too politically inconvenient to your hold on power, you're just a moderate Republican, right? You're just a normal Republican. You want to undermine the very democracy that we claim makes us special and gives us moral authority to have, disastrous foreign policy. You want to undermine that democracy, and you'll sign on to amicus briefs to overturn the results of our presidential election. That makes you a moderate Republican. But if you want to get people stimulus checks, and if you want to guarantee healthcare in the United States, that apparently makes you a radical, dangerous leftist. I didn't grow up like many of you. I did not grow up in a far left household or a far right household. I didn't grow up in a house like that. I grew up in a house that was actually proudly independent. I grew up in a house that said, you need to be watching all these people because none of these people can be trusted to consistently deliver maximally for you. And so you need to keep your eyes out and actually look and read and see what's happening. That's the house that I grew up into. And, there's a lot of people that are like team red or team blue. And in our two-party system, for the most part, if you want to be a public servant in elected office and you're not kind of running on a local level, we have to choose team red or team blue because we don't have a parliamentary system like there are in other countries. In other countries, there are many different parties, and you elect who you think is best for your pocket of the world, and that may result in one party getting 10%, another party getting 20%, another party getting 30%, and then what they have to do is that they have to cobble together, like these 2 or 3 or 4 party, whatever it may be, have to form a coalition that says we're going to be the majority, we're going to be the government, right? Which almost forces people to see and discuss the more nuanced differences. And everyday people can understand that. But if you're just team red or team blue, people just make claims about what they are and what they support and what they don't support and whether they support it or not support it. There's less accountability for it. So anyways, that's just a big rant because if people think that the present day is like radical far left, they just haven't even opened a book. Like we had much, much more radical and radicalism in the United States as recently as the 60s, as recently when we talk about how labor unions started in this country, that was radical. People died. People died in this country. It was almost like a war for the 40-hour work week and your weekends. And a lot of people died for these very basic economic rights. And we can't go back. We can't go back to that time. And so I guess the thing that is sad is that when you see people that indulge, both on the right and the left, both Democrats and Republicans, when they indulge in these narratives of common sense policies being radical, what they're trying to do is really shorten the window of what's possible. Doubling the minimum wage should be normal. Guaranteed health care should be normal. Trying to save our planet should be centrist politics. And, I'm happy. I'd be happy to sacrifice, my reputation if people were calling me a sellout for believing in guaranteed health care, right? If that left was much more expansionary. But the fact of the matter is that this stuff should be common sense. And we have way too many people, our perception of what's radical, our perception of being able to shut down when we get past a trigger, right? Because here's the thing that's also a huge irony to me is that all these Republicans and all of these folks who were anti-shutdown are the same people who weren't wearing masks who forced us to shut down in the first place. Shutdowns are not an inevitability. It's not something that we want to do. It's not something that anybody wants to do. I want to see my family. I haven't seen my family in a year, like many of you all. I want to be able to visit my friends without being scared. And I want to be able to hang out with my friends when it's cold outside and not have to be outside. All of that. Nobody wants a shutdown. But the same people who are now like, oh, anti-shutdown, we can't shut down, like blah, 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 were the same people who weren't wearing masks, who forced the caseloads to be so high that we had to shut down areas to begin with. So if you're anti-shutdown, you better to have been wearing a mask all damn year, because don't come to me and say you're anti-shutdown when you're spreading COVID all over the place, potentially. And so I don't just say that about everyday people, but our elected officials. Because you all, for the science and for the studies and for everything to reach mass understanding for just the public, that takes a while. But as elected officials, our job is to be first in modeling responsible behavior. The first. That's our job. And because I can't ask you to wear a mask if I'm not wearing a mask. I can't ask you to take a vaccine if I'm not willing to take a vaccine. I can't demand that I can't ask for you to endure without a stimulus check or without, UI if I'm not willing to understand reality without that, to really fully acknowledge that. And so I just, I was supposed to do a quick update and then do your Q&A, but I wanted to let you all know what the status of things are. So, in conclusion, there's a lot of BS fighting, and there's a $900 billion package on the table. It has $300 in additional unemployment insurance for you. It's got a bunch of other things, but I want to tell you the things that you're going to feel, right? So it's got state and local funding. What does that mean? When we have these shutdowns, so the federal government does not, in terms of our spending and when people say, how do you pay for it? Federal government doesn't really work like a piggy bank or like a household where you have to budget and like every dollar in is what comes out. And if you don't get that dollar in right away, you can't spend it. That's not how the federal government financing works. But states and municipalities, cities and states do rely on that taxes, on those kinds of taxes and that kind of income. So when we grind economies to a halt, all that sales tax, small businesses that we really need a lot of help for, we need rent relief for small businesses, we need payment relief for small businesses, we need payroll relief for small businesses too, all of that as well. Rent support, people who are on the cusp of eviction or have been evicted, we need to make sure that we take care of you all as well. But anyways, states and localities, when we shut down states and localities, sales tax isn't getting exchanged the same way. Like all that stuff isn't really happening. And so states need to pay their teachers. We need to pay for our schools. We need to pay for garbage collection. So if you're in New York City, you may notice that some things are starting to be shaky, right? Like garbage collection happens a little less frequently because we can't pay for it to happen more frequently, right? So this COVID package, what we're trying to get is state and local funding, because since the federal government doesn't work in that same way, since the federal government has a lot more financial and monetary tools at their assistance, many more than states do or municipalities do. What we can do, one part of this COVID package, is to get states and localities money so that they can keep paying their police officers, all of this whole thing. People are talking about defund, right? Everyone's talking about defund. You want to know who's actually voting to defund the police? Republicans. Because Republicans are trying to block state and local funding so that those budgets dry up. Where do they think that these police budgets come from? So if you want to complain about defunding police, go talk to a Republican, first of all. But, I digress. That state and local funding, it goes to teachers, it goes to firefighters, it goes to nurses, and yes, it also does go to police officers in the short term. Now, what we also see, so that state and local funding is like it goes to your garbage collection. Literally anybody that is employed by your state or your municipality, any service that you rely on, any of it goes to state and local funding. So that first part of that package is to keep your state, whether it's a red state or a blue state, above water so that we can at least operate normally for a short period of time as we navigate other transitions financially, right? Then the second thing is unemployment insurance. So this has $300 in unemployment assistance. The third thing is that there is haggling over this corporate immunity, right? There's some corporate immunity. Mitch McConnell's going like all out. We want 5 years, no lawsuits. I do think that some people are trying to walk off that ledge and do something smaller. We'll see what the more specific language on that is. But it's got $300 in UI. We need stimulus checks. We need to add stimulus checks. So state of play is that that's the current package. The current package has $300 in additional UI. It's got state and local funding. It's got a bunch of other things. It does not have stimulus checks. So right now, members of the Senate, and we're in the House, and we do have bipartisan support to try to add stimulus checks in there. We even believe that Trump wants stimulus checks. So we're getting resistance not from the entire Republican Party, but from pockets of the Republican Party. And so that's the state of play. Hopefully we will be back next week. Congress will be back next week. And we're really kind of coming close on some of these deadlines. And so I'm hoping that we get answers by next week on what's going on. But that's kind of the current state of play. And I'll take some questions for you all right now. Pulling up some questions for you all. Let's see. Someone said, what can we do to help push for canceling student loans? So one big thing that we can do, I'm supposed to be cooking and I'm like getting way too wrapped up with you all. One thing that we can really do, let me also get some pasta on the stove too. I don't know if you all can hear me, but one thing that we can do on student loans is, and I don't know if this is too loud, but one thing that we can really do on student loans is that we really need broad-based advocacy. So here's the deal, like what we're hearing is that so first of all, it is possible for a president to use executive action to try to cancel student debt. the clearest path is canceling federal student debt because the federal government holds it, right? We hold that student debt, so we have a lot more flexibility in what we're able to do with it. There is also flexibility on private student loans too, right? We can buy the government could buy private student loans, potentially. But a lot of people will argue about that, this, that, and the other. I think that there's possibilities in both directions. But I also believe that, and we know that the president can wipe out student loan debt with executive order. And the thing that I find frustrating is that, when people are like, oh, like, do we really want to do that? And is it going too far? And this, that, and the other. We have to understand Donald Trump has just ripped apart so much progress by executive order. And what we're dealing with is a right that is willing to stretch and do unusual things in order to execute on their agenda. And then the moment we get in power, if we are too scared about and too preoccupied with like norms, so much so that it keeps us from actually changing people's lives, then who is that norm serving, really? And if that norm is not serving people, then maybe we should change the norm. And maybe the norm should be that we actually have the power to help people. Maybe that's what the norm should be. And so we do have the ability. It is there. But once again, there's this frame that if you don't think that people should be in debt for life, for going to and getting a secondary education, you're radical, right? Like that's the thing, is that people act as though like I frame myself this way. No. Our established, our establishment, our media, like all of these things frames all of these common sense policies as radical. And I also don't think that it's a coincidence that I'm young, I'm brown, and I'm a woman. That adds to the ease of applying antagonism to that narrative, right? Like if I was like a clean-cut white dude saying we should cancel student loan relief, it would be seen as like automatically more normal. But I do feel like a lot of this narrative is racialized or classified too, because the people who are demanding these changes tend to be working class. They tend to be working class, middle class, black and brown, women, people, just everybody. And but if you aren't like part of this like elite cocktail club unit, then like you are, I don't know, you're having these demands for bold visionary action from Democrats. It's like seen as radical. So anyways, it's possible. The thing is that we have to normalize it, which means that, if your parents are like moderate Democrats, maybe you can talk to them about why this isn't crazy. Because frankly, a lot of the things that that folks call radical now in both parties are things that older generations of both parties enjoyed when they were growing up. Because college was practically free for people's parents and grandparents growing up. College was practically free for them. And if they paid anything, it was like papitas, very little. Certainly not lifetime debt loads of money. And so the things that people call radical today are the same things that they enjoyed when they were growing up. The things that gave them a chance when they were growing up. When people talk about a wealth tax as being super radical, we had one. We had a very aggressive wealth tax that was championed by Republicans. And so this erosion of norms, I think, is like very much coincides with this. Frankly, it's like this diminishment of power of working people in our democracy and a real takeover of industry. And I feel like a lot of companies and corporations, they get worried about there being like so much hostility right now. And what they're deeming as hostility is literally people just trying to have any semblance of the economic rights that they had 50 years ago. But because folks in with that degree of concentrated power are so used to it, anything that almost feels like an unequivocal movement towards working people is seen as like some drastic threat. And it's not, and here's the thing is that we have to also assess the dangers of the path that we're on. And I'm talking about like, even when you forget about Trump, even if you rewind to before Trump, we were still on a calamitous path of income inequality. We were on a calamitous path of bailing out Wall Street and doing all of these things. And it's not a partisan thing. This is about the concentration of wealth and power in America. And when you have that concentration of power among a tiny sliver of people, and you're leaving the majority of people to starve, be evicted, or just having to work 2-3 jobs to survive, it's creating an unstable social situation, an unstable society, a society that has more homes than homeless people, more empty homes than people who are experiencing homeless, is an unstable society. A society that disincentivizes the education of its own populace by creating mountains of debt at the prospect of having a more educated, people, is a dysfunctioning and disordered society. And so if we actually want to create some semblance of peace in our country, we have to break from our norm, because the accepted norm is acceptance of widespread poverty and insecurity and people feeling like they have to choose between medicine and groceries in the wealthiest country in the world. What good, what use is being the wealthiest country in the world if people can't even afford to live, right? You don't have to be the wealthiest country in the world in order to make sure that people have health care. And we know this because other countries that are not the wealthiest country in the world do this. And so if we are going to be the wealthiest society in human history and love it and revel in it, then that money better be going to something good. Because if it's going to bailing out billionaires and people with 10 helipads and whatever, like them leaving their inheritance so their cat can have a butler, then what use is it? I would much rather live in a society where people don't have to worry about being homeless, or people don't have to worry about their medical debt being what gets, what makes them homeless. People feeling like they actually have power in their job and in their work. And that you won't be fired for asserting your rights and not wanting to be, harassed or discriminated against. Oh, and by the way, the other thing that's radical, apparently, is not having amnesia about the history of our country. That's also apparently super radical. And what's normal is forgetting about our past, even our most immediate and recent past. Like I laugh so much at these people who are like, defund the police is too complicated. People don't understand it. We need to pick something simple, like, when Black Lives Matter came out, everyone knew what that means. Are you kidding me? Like, when BLM came out, they also faced all the same critiques that folks who want to, rein in out of control police budgets so that they can fund their schools are dealing with. People said Black Lives Matter is confusing. What about all lives? It's very isolating. Like, you aren't going to get people on your side. There was a time when no Democratic politician, or very few, were willing to say Black Lives Matter. There was a time when it was not seen as, like too radical and too confusing and too polarizing. And the fact that people have already forgotten that, and that was just 5 minutes ago, to think about our actual, and actually ask people to reflect and acknowledge the immense just racial apartheid that the United States had and has had in many different ways, and how that impacts to, yes, the present day, including the Electoral College and some of the very, underlying structures of the Senate, like the filibuster. Some folks may think that's too much to ask of everyone, but I don't think it's too much to ask of our elected officials. But anyways, COVID, we're hoping on getting this checked. If you want to cancel your student loans, you got to make sure that we have to here's the thing, you have to cross that line and realize that political parties are not fan clubs, and you don't just cheer on whoever's in charge. Because if you're not willing to engage in constructive critique, protest, petitioning, etc., if you're not willing to engage in that, it's never going to happen. That's why, politics is not a fan club, right? And it's just not. And the moment that anyone thinks that they're going to support any party or any person, no matter what they do, is the moment that we realize that, that you're contributing to real problems. So you have to demand it. And you need to demand student loan debt just as strongly from a Democratic administration as you would a Republican administration, period. Because there is something to be said about hypocrisy, where if you're only going to bring energy around policy demands when a Republican is in charge and say those things towards them, but you're not willing to bring those same policy demands with that same energy when a Democrat is in charge, then are we really in this to change the world, or are we just in this to pick a fan club, right? And so we have to continue on the organizing, and we have to continue on the pressure. And guess what? People are going to fight back, because people don't elected officials don't like being criticized. It's just, it is what it is. And so there's always going to be that pushback. But we have to say, we supported you, and say why you voted for somebody. You need to be really vocal about that. If you voted for a Democrat so that Democrats could cancel your student debt, say that. If you voted for a Democrat so that we could, at the very least, lower Medicare, the age of qualification of Medicare, a dramatic amount, say that. Why did you vote? And this is why it's so important to vote for something and not just vote against something, right? If you voted because you want to see climate action and you want to make sure we stop poisoning ourselves, say that. And so we have to say that. We have to remind ourselves what we're trying to accomplish, because this is not just a game of personalities and let's just, puff people up unsubstantively, right? We have to make sure that we are always talking about the issues. What do we want? And so I'm here to tell you that canceling student loan debt is possible, and don't let people get away with telling you that it's not. It is. In fact, I think student loan debt cancellation is probably one of the most possible things that we can do up front. So we have to demand it, and we have to organize around it. So aside from that, it's getting a little late. All I did was, I don't know, shave a lemon. I forget what they call this. But so I really got to actually cook. Sorry I didn't actually make a meal for you all, but I will try to make up for it, because all I did was put water in a pot and shave a lemon. But I will make up for it by posting a photo of this meal to my stories when I'm actually